everyone got quiet, so I guess it's time to start. For those of you that don't know, I'm Martin, Cynthia's husband, and I want to thank you for coming to this. Very big crowd, and I guess that just goes to show you how many different lives Cynthia's life touched. Cynthia was my everything, but I have more closet space now. Okay, that worked out. Cynthia would have advised me not to do that. She would have really appreciated the reaction. Everyone's happy. She would want everyone to be happy. And I've rehearsed this several times in my head. I don't usually make notes as some of my old colleagues remember. I just wing it. So that's mostly what I'm doing, but I did bring in one of her books. And these are handmade books. They're all over the house. So there's more than I imagined. She did a lot of stuff. I'd be in my studio, she'd be in hers. And she did a lot of stuff I wasn't aware of. Her box collection, as I was going through it, certain boxes would have a single word in it, like balance or harmony, things like this. And lots of handmade books all over the place, in her studio and in the house, and drawers and cabinets, and hidden behind books and shelves and stuff. And she kept lists of everything, like every vacation we ever took. I could find out what meals we got, what towns, and all this sort of thing. But several of the books connected communities. She wrote gratitudes in, and I think most of you know her, remember her as a strong person that was very generous with her time, and like a bright light shining on all the rest of us. But she had a kind of fragile side too. And so this particular one I brought in is one of her gratitudes books, where each page is a list of things she was grateful for. And this book goes from August of 24 to January of 25. And I selected a few pages to read. She did 5 a day, and this wasn't completed. In January, she stopped for a while, and then I'm sure I could find one from March or so when she'd start up again in a different book that she made. I picked this one out because it was the smallest one and easiest to carry. But I guess I'll just get into that and hold your questions for later. So, July 16th, 24. I'm grateful for our new mattress. I'm grateful that our new mattress will be delivered tomorrow. I'm grateful I could afford to buy a mattress. I'm grateful for my students. I'm grateful to my students and for my students. Sorry, I shouldn't do a cold reading of this. But I'm grateful to have Eloise in my life. I'm grateful for Martin most of the time. And she drew a little smiley face. I'm grateful we have a new mattress the next day. I'm grateful that Martin likes it. I'm grateful that I'm going to Austin this weekend. And that's where her granddaughter and daughter and son-in-law live. I'm grateful Mary Russick wants to buy one of my watercolors. I'm grateful that Margaret visited Anne-Marie and I for that lunch. And I'm skipping a few days. I picked out 10 of these in the 7-month period. I'm grateful to be doing the YMM workshop with Jane. I'm grateful that my class went well. I'm grateful that Eloise asked Jamie, Mimi? I'm grateful for my house. I'm grateful that my tea is ready. I'm grateful I have 10 paid students in October with 2 more almost committed. I'm grateful that I have paper on hand for the workshop. I'm grateful that I'm relatively healthy and happy. I'm grateful that Charlene came over. I'm grateful that Charlene signed up for Inktober. I'm grateful I didn't lose, so this one was September 11th of 24. I'm grateful I didn't lose anyone on September 11th. I'm grateful that I remembered to write Susie a check. I'm grateful that I did a little painting last night. I'm grateful that I got my cute little garden planted. I'm grateful it was Martin's night to cook. I'm grateful that I lost 3 pounds this week. I'm grateful for care. I'm grateful that I'll be seeing Eloise in a week and a half. I'm grateful that I have no obligations this weekend. I'm grateful that I'll be able to buy more plants. And this is the last page, and this one, January 30th of last year. I'm grateful there was a good turnout for my show. I'm grateful that I felt well enough to attend my own reception. I'm grateful that I don't feel too bad. I'm grateful for videos of Eloise. I'm grateful to my ex-colleagues at SHSU coming to my show. And so that's an example of like her doing this almost every day. And it seems like she started around 2004 or so with these. And so it's a little insight into Cynthia that maybe you didn't know. And I've been having a hard time getting through all this, as you can imagine. And I wrote Silver Friends in the last couple months, and I'd say something different every time, trying to deal with the whole thing, because she should still be here with us, I think. But, so here's a text that I wrote to a friend of mine. I said I try to take, in trying to make it through all this, I try to take the position that we all have to die sometime. And she outlived her parents. She had a happy life with wonderful animal pets. In fact, you guys wouldn't know this, but we had the best dog in the world. A few of you may think you have a little insight into that, but Cynthia and I really are convinced. We had a perfect place to live, and she had a wonderful life. She had a wonderful daughter and a wonderful grandchild, and she had a lot of love in her life and time to be in her studio. And living to 75 is pretty good. At least that's what I keep telling myself. So, I'm going to turn this over to her daughter, Jamie Reids, and then we'll move on from there, all right? Is that a good plan? Okay. This is, okay. But there's also the handheld mic that might be better.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Good. All right. I have a prop. Got one of the paintings. It says bloom where you're planted. I don't have as many jokes as Martin, but Jamie Reid, Cynthia's daughter, her only child, as she liked to say, just the one perfect one. We like that. I've had the space to reflect on her life. And although this doesn't work out perfectly, I've been thinking of her life in roughly 3 parts. The first part, her childhood in New York, when she was closest to her siblings, parents, and grandparents. Part 2, moving to Texas, becoming a teacher, having a family, and raising me. And part 3, not long after I went to college, she met Martin, moved to Willis, and enjoyed a life outside of high school classrooms. She told me several times that she was the happiest she had ever been in this last stage, after retiring, but never slowing down. If anything, she seemed to gain momentum in the last decades of her life, teaching more, making new friends, and always creating. Every time I read her newsletter or checked her Facebook, she had developed a new style or a new series. She was always painting, weaving, drawing, taking classes herself, and then sharing her knowledge with others. She was, to use her own word, blooming. I came across this watercolor, Bloom Where You're Planted, a few weeks ago while in her studio. At the time, I thought it was a lovely sentiment, and thought Eloise's room could use some colorful positivity and always more Mimi energy. Over the last few weeks, as I've been thinking of what I wanted to say here today, I've come to believe it also represented her very well. A large part of her story, I think, is flourishing in a place that was not a natural fit. She would tell you she never expected to spend 50 years of her life in Southeast Texas. She was a New Yorker and proud of it. Also proud of her heritage. While growing up, I heard many stories about my grandparents and also great-grandparents. My grandma was a Jewish New Yorker who married young and had 4 children by the time she was 27. Thankfully, she had loving, stable parents, Bernard and Bess Trencher, who lived close and visited often. I received my middle name, Elizabeth, from this great-grandmother. My mom said they brought a stability to her youth that she wouldn't have had otherwise. After my grandma raised her 4 children, she left a marriage that had long stopped serving her. After being a mother and a wife for decades, she sought out adventure in middle age, marrying a man she met through the personal ads in the 70s, and moving aboard their sailboat, aptly named Childhood 2. I know my mom was proud of her adventurous mother who reinvented herself in middle age, and I see my grandma reflected in much of my mom's art. Of course, all the watercolors of ocean waves, but also the weavings that remind me of my grandma's quilting. And though her father had flaws, she was also very proud of his accomplishments. Although he was born into privilege, John Kraft nevertheless worked diligently as a pollster in D.C. Among his achievements to advance liberal policy and politicians, he developed sampling techniques that exposed racial discrimination in jury selection, then went on to create a more equitable system that was adopted by the federal government. He was a staunch Democrat and a gifted writer. Since my mom's death, I have found so many letters from him to her. They clearly have a special relationship. Letters were several pages long, all typed. Sometimes 2 letters in 1 week. Instead of using her name, he used pet names in the salutation. Tootsie, Passion Flower, Sweet Baby, and Poopsie included. Which reminds me of the very silly names that my husband calls my daughter. All that to say, she saw herself as a New Yorker with progressive values and a Jewish heritage. She very much did not expect to move to Texas in the 70s. She was actually headed to San Francisco in the summer of 1970 to be with her people, the hippies who were protesting war, racism, and sexism. but she only made it across half the country. When she and her friends stopped in Colorado, it was so beautiful that they decided to stay. My mom told me that she and her friend, actually got lost, soon after, they met two Texas men who lived across the street. My mom told me that she and her friend weren't sure which man to date. So as the taller of the two women, my mom took the taller of the two men. My father. Both couples ended up getting married, and my dad brought my mom home to Texas. And this started, in my mind, the second chapter of her life. I wasn't around for those earliest of years, but she would tell me how much of a culture shock it was. She liked to tell stories about first encounters with my dad's parents. Born and bred Texans, Jim Bill and Rita Reed. They were completely foreign to her, from their super sweet iced tea to the set hairstyles, Lord's Prayer, and great attention to the cleanliness of both lawns and automobiles. Despite the differences, she grew to love my dad's family and spoke highly of my dad's mother always, even attending her funeral in Waco many years after divorcing my dad. She was able to find common ground and form deep bonds with people who did not share her values on religion, politics, or even pastimes. That resilience and ability to adapt became a necessity in the years to come. When I was 5, my parents divorced. So, at 32, she was raising a child on a public school teacher's salary and living far from her family. Then, a couple years later, at 35, she was diagnosed with a rare breast cancer that caused her, I suspect, to experience existential grief. I imagine she asked herself questions like, why is this happening to me? Who is going to help me through this? What will happen to my child if I do? Have I done enough with my life? During this time, my grandma offered to move us to New York to be closer to family. It must have been so tempting, but she stayed in Texas. She stayed, she told me later, so that I could remain close to my dad. She understood the importance of a father-daughter relationship. I believe this time period was a chrysalis of sorts. I certainly didn't know what was going on. I was 8. It was during this time that she returned to school to get a Master of Fine Arts, a degree that requires intense studio time. These were difficult years. And as someone who recently had a baby while getting a graduate degree, I can relate to having a full schedule and a very lengthy to-do list. However, I also acknowledge that I am 15 years older than she was when she had a baby. And I have a very supportive husband and live directly next door to all-star parents-in-law. I can't imagine doing it without support and life experiences. It wasn't easy, honestly, for neither of us, to get some middle school angst off my chest. Because she was overextended, I was always the last kid picked up from school, and several times a week while she was in a class, I was with a babysitter watching Mr. Ed on Nick at Night. Or less often, I would go to her class with her and end up walking around the Estill building, going up and down the stairs of the Estill building, and rolling down a hill outside the Estill building. I know she did her best. She made me feel valued and important by encouraging me to evaluate her work and give my feedback, which she always took seriously. And sometimes, based on my critique, made changes. Some of my core childhood memories are beautifully basic. Sitting together at the kitchen table, her painting on one side, often buildings during those years, and me doing homework, or reading, or my favorite, asking her questions about her childhood, her experiences, her favorites. Her favorite color, lavender. Her lucky number, 17. Her favorite singer, Diana Ross. Favorite movie at that time, Baghdad Cafe, a film about the bond between two women. Point being, we knew each other very well. During those years, she was mostly mine, and I was mostly hers. Our relationship was the reason that I very much wanted a daughter of my own. She was my best friend. And although I have many happy memories of my childhood, I know she would agree that the 80s and early 90s were not her best years. They were essential and well spent, a time of deep change, but perhaps not obvious from the outside. She was figuring out who she wanted to become, moving away from her identity as an art teacher and toward that of an artist. She was a woman who seemed to gain speed as she aged, learning more, teaching more, creating more, and inspiring more. She could be exhausting. I had some idea of what all she was up to, but I didn't really understand the extent of her community until she got sick last year. When she was getting chemo and then radiation, I saw how her people came together around her. I never took her to chemo or radiation treatment. I never needed to. She always had a friend ready to help. And in her last few weeks while at the hospital, I again witnessed the many friends at her side. And after her death, many friends told me how much she meant in their lives. Even though Conroe, Texas, is not the place she thought she would spend most of her life, she put down roots here, teaching thousands of teens, college students, art teachers, and adults in classrooms throughout the area, and always supporting other artists. I see that she not only bloomed herself, but was generous with her time and talent so that others could also thrive and bloom creatively. Thank you so much for being there and for loving my mom.
That's her brother. I'm not sure if he is. I know Jack is a brother because I was one of my Jack is coming out.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Come on.
Okay. My name is Richard Kraft. I'm Cynthia's younger brother. She had two younger brothers, Jack and me, Richard, and of course, my sister Stephanie, who's not a brother. But thank you for being here and allowing me to speak here to about the most loved person I've ever known. To have all of you here, and then since she died, and if you were a Facebook friend of hers, you know how prolific a Facebooker she was. I think she had more Facebook friends than anyone else I knew. She made a post practically every day, and so when she died, I made a post about her. So I got a lot of replies. So many people from like 50 years ago, the best teacher I ever had. They inspired me. All these people reaching out that she, I affected their lives in such a positive way. It's still incredibly powerful. My brother and I used to talk about being a great man. And who's a great man? We agreed that our maternal grandfather, who's already mentioned, Bernard Treacher, was a great man. And I don't know if Jack and I will ever be considered great men, but Cynthia was a great woman. She was a great human being. And, but I'll share a little of my experiences with her, no timeline. So I was born in 54, she was born in 1950, she was 4.5 years older than me. And I don't have like a tremendous amount of childhood memories, you know. And we have spent more time in later years than we did in younger years. But she was always so kind, and she was always so fun. I remember when I was a little kid, she took me out creeping one night. Basically, that was like to go look in the neighbor's windows. See something, you know, I didn't even know about sex back then. And then there was a really, you know, kind whatever. When I was a little kid, I don't know, must have been 6, 7, 8 years old. I was sick for Halloween one year, and then she took an extra bag and asked people for extra candy for his little brother who was home sick. And certainly they gave her crap over that, or some of them did anyway, you know. But then it was a couple years later, I was in a bad accident. I was in the hospital for a week. The day after Halloween, it was like a record haul of Halloween candy. A couple of grocery bags. It was on a Saturday. I was out all day getting candy. And I had this fall the next day. So then I get these, and back then they didn't allow siblings or kids into the hospital, so I didn't see my siblings for a week. But I get these notes from Cynthia, we're guarding your Halloween day. And when I got home, there was a few lollipops left. I found a couple of grocery bags of candy. Yeah. And then we talk about, like, she talked about the little book she did, and Martin showed me these journals that she kept too. And I remember being like maybe, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. She had like a notepad and she was writing something. What are you doing? Oh, it's my to-do list. To-do list? What, you don't know what to do now? No conception of that. And so that was early days. I had no idea about all these little books and all that stuff. And then when I was like maybe 13, so in this house that we lived in Blaga, New York. And by the way, so you know, she grew up in New York City in an apartment, and my parents built this house, and then they even had a song that they'd sing, the Rockland song, driving through Rockland County to build this house. And she would describe our house or this beloved as idyllic, because she came from an apartment in New York and saw a house built, and they had her own room and a yard and all of that. For me, it was green and boring. It was like, I couldn't do that. But at any rate, so when I was like maybe 12 or 13, you walk into the blog-up house, and it was built on a hill, what you call a bi-level home. You walk in, there's a landing, you go downstairs, you go upstairs. Big stairs going up, big wide hallway. 2 bedrooms on each side, bathroom in the back. And I come walking in the door one day, shut the door, and then turn around, I'm about to walk upstairs, and then boom, bathroom door, walks up, and Cynthia comes walking out, wearing a towel, and she goes like this, covering herself naked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like 12 or 13 years old, and I just see this 18-year-old woman. She just walks into a room, that was it. Next time I saw her naked, about 30 years later, and Martin being Martin, they were visiting for Christmas in Albuquerque, from Albuquerque. And so they were visiting for Christmas. Martin being Martin took us to, where the hell is Martin? Okay. Martin, he took us up to the Jemez Mountains outside Albuquerque, about, what, 50 miles or so. And he took us to these hot springs. And it was Christmas Eve, and snowflakes had fallen. And we're in this hot springs. It's so cool. And I would say it was probably the most enchanting Christmas Eve I've ever had in my life. And Cynthia and I talked about that in December. You know, sometime before she went to the hospital, whatever, and she agreed with me. That was really cool. And So, you know, I moved to Albuquerque from New York in 1977. I've been there ever since, went to the university there and so on. And so then Cynthia started visiting in the 80s, and then she made her first visit to Jamie, and many, many visits to Albuquerque, and a lot of fun every time she came. And I'll say something about her art. I'm not an artist. I will tell you one thing I always enjoyed when I visited her, coming visiting, was always to meet her friends, because you know, so many, I know some of your faces, I don't know your names, but it was a good time. I know there was a lot of fun. And I'm a real estate broker, and I hang around with real estate brokers, and I'm tired of that. And you get to meet those cool artists, creative people, just a totally different, you know, crowd of people that I'm used to. So it's always so enjoyable coming here. She would tell you, and I am proud that I own more of her art than anybody else. I've got at least 15 of her works. Hope you'll all come to my house and see them, because you've probably not seen them. Anyway, so she spent a lot of time in Albuquerque. She spent time in Haines. Martin's has a friend that owns a bed and breakfast in Haines Springs, and Cynthia watched it for a month while they were in Europe back in 2000. She did a lot of painting there. So then about several years ago, I wanted to buy two New Mexico paintings. He gave me a twofer deal. You know about twofers, right? So that's exciting. And but she's, you know, and I talked to Jamie this last night. I don't think she ever would think of herself. She wouldn't want to think of herself as a salesman. But she was a hell of a good salesman. And so I picked out two. There's like maybe 7. I was like, oh crap, how I gotta pick 2? You know, so I finally picked the 2. And then her answer was always, oh, good choice. You know, but you always feel like, oh wow, those are the ones that she would have picked. These are the ones that she liked best. And it's like, no, that's silly. But anyway, she was really good about that. She was such a great marketer. I mentioned Facebook. I bought a couple of paintings off of Facebook, and I know she's on Instagram. She's everywhere, and I don't have anybody else that, you know, is on Facebook, you know, like she was. She was just incredible. So what else do I have to say? I don't know what else to say, except that I'm glad that you're all here, and I'm so impressed that, here's something I just want to close with, that I think about what made Cynthia, you know, that she just is so accepting, and I keep mentioning Facebook. Like she mentioned to me one time, I had this friend from college, a guy named Mike Joy, and she would just accept anybody. And she asked me, like, who's this guy? I said, he's just a college buddy, he's harmless. She's like, oh, okay. So she's accepting that anybody that enter her world and give anybody their time, you know. But I just think that if you were ever to, you know, when I think about where Cynthia came from, and if you ever had a chance to read my mom's memoirs, Cynthia was, you know, the firstborn, and she had, I think, just so much love poured upon her from my parents, and she had a bunch of aunts and uncles, both sets of grandparents, and then all my parents. She was the first child of my parents' friends. So there's just so much love poured upon her, and I think that it was natural for her to just give it back, you know. So anyway, I think that's really cool, and I just want to say something about, you know, my sister Stephanie, who adored Cynthia, talked to her every week. My brother Jack, Cynthia told me how he was her first best friend, and I know we're still very close to the end. To Jamie, who I can't imagine in my life, seeing a better mother-daughter relationship than the two of you had. And of course, Martin, just being a rock, being there, giving her so much love, and you know, for the last 30 years. So can't thank you enough. And thank all of you people for being here and sharing your love with me.